Question number 35. The Catechism on the United States Constitution. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. And this is a Common Lawyer comments concerning our common law, our law of the land, as it is compared and contrasted with its ever-present antagonist on every continent and in every age, the law of the city. And arguably the most solid stepping stone of our common law in modern times, down through history, is the Constitution of the United States. And this is a catechism by Arthur J. Stansbury on the Constitution of the United States, published 1828. Question 35. But even if the Congress itself should make a law which is contrary to the Constitution, must the people obey it? Short question. Let me read it again. But even if the Congress itself should make a law which is contrary to the Constitution, must the people obey it? And the answer is no. They can if they want, but we're not bound to obey anything that's not constitutional. But I hasten to add, if you choose to do that, you may go to jail. That's a reality. How do I know? I've had it happen. Being a lawyer is dangerous business sometimes. Being in court's dangerous. Depends upon what your conviction is. I just saw, well, there were a couple of fellows in the Trump administration chose to go to federal prison rather than obey a law that they thought was clearly and said was clearly unconstitutional. We saw one of them showed up. He got out of prison, and that evening he spoke at the Republican National Convention. Maybe some of you remember that. And another one. Oh, he's that wild Irishman. What's his name? Steve Bannon. Steve. Is that it? Yeah. He went to federal prison because he believed that what the Congress of the United States ordered was unconstitutional. Order what? They said, if you don't do it, we'll have you thrown in federal prison. All of this is unprecedented, but don't think it hasn't gone on for a long time in other ways. You don't think Constitution of the United or the Congress has not passed unconstitutional laws? I'd say probably most laws Congress passes are unconstitutional because in our own day they exceed the powers that the Constitution has granted the general government in Washington, D.C. Remember, this is a fundamental of our system of government. There's not another one like it in the world. We have two sovereignties operating at the same time. The sovereignty of the United States government and the sovereignty of the 50 state governments. And the sovereignty of the United States government is limited government. The federal courts are very limited courts. The Congress of the United States has limited jurisdiction. The president, therefore, has limited jurisdiction. Why is it limited? Because the Constitution of the United States limits it. Remember, this document we call our Constitution does not govern us. It does not govern us, no. It governs those that are in government. That's what it's there for, to limit them, not to limit us. That brings up another point, and it's just a point in passing. There have been amendments attached to the Constitution that were not intended to limit government, but were intended to limit the private sector. Not intended to limit government, but were intended to limit the private sector. Now, when this happened, the most pronounced place that's happened was the amendment that was designed to end slavery in the United States. Not just any slavery, and there's no other way to say it, Negro slavery. That's the only kind of slavery there was. It was a slavery based upon the tone, the amount of pigment in your skin. People say, no. It was based upon who your ancestors are. Oh, if it was convenient to do that, that's what happened, yes. But also it was more convenient in most cases just to look at a fellow and say, you don't look white enough for me. Matter of fact, most of the states, the laws were clear. If you had one drop of African Negro blood in your veins, you were not a white man. Therefore, you did not enjoy You had all the freedoms and responsibilities of a white man that God had given you, but the government said, we're not going to let you enjoy them. You see, you can't be separated from your rights. You've taken my rights away. No, nobody ever took your rights away. That's not even fundamentally possible. And our Declaration of 76 says that certain rights are self-evident and are inalienable. So I think it's unalienable. Inalienable. Oh, it's the same thing. And no, it is not related to putting liens on your property or you. That is true. You can't lien the rights of God, but that's not what that's saying. That's the word alien. It's the Latin word for stranger, outlandish man from another country, alien, space alien, whatever. It means to be alienated. You can't alienate something. It means you can't separate it from yourself. It's so inextricably bound by God's creation and who you are that it can't be separated. You can't lose your rights. You can't have your rights taken. They are your responsibilities, duties. They are duties that arise from law. Well, duties only arise from law. God gives law. The will of the sovereign is law, and all duties arise from that law God has given. And no man can take those away from you. You're responsible to exercise them, no matter how hard he tries to take them away. And he can really make it hard on you. Say, I'm going to throw you in federal prison if you try to exercise your right to trial. I'm going to put you in federal prison. Did you know that that's the policy now of the courts, the federal courts? If you go to trial and make them prove their case against you and lose, they say the judge then has authority to give you a longer prison sentence because you even challenged the government. That's wrong. I don't mean just a little bit. That's the policy of the courts. The courts do that now consistently. Well, you had the temerity to make the government prove its criminal case against you, and you lost. The jury said otherwise. Therefore, we're going to attach 2 more years on your sentence. I'd hate to be that judge in the final judgment. I'd hate to be him. You know, people that do things like that, I think they're under the impression that all power is here on earth and the courts of last resort are here on earth, and then there is no appeal from what happens here on earth. But I know better. People try to get me to run for judge. I tell them, well, I could run, I could get in. I'd be thrown out pretty quick. I'd probably be impeached. Why? Well, I'm not willing to enforce laws that are not law. The legislature passes something or the courts say it's got to be this way, and I say, no, that's not right. That's again our common law. And it's also again the Bible, which means it's again the common law. I'm not going to do that. You aren't? No. Well, if they can't get rid of you by impeachment, they'll just have some person they say is insane shoot you. That's happened more times than we want to admit. Impeachment is our common law method, of course. Well, here, this brings up a point. I might just camp here for a minute. No, I'll tell you what I'll do. Miss Francine, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue with a few more questions. Then I'm going to come back in the next segment and do a clip on how to know when to disobey a law of government. How you know when to do it. I don't know everything about it, but I'll give you my ideas about it and how I try to operate. In the meantime, let's go on. Who is to determine whether any law is contrary to the Constitution or not? The people themselves? Are they to determine? Well, how do they do that? You know, people say, well, if we the people were in charge, well, what does that mean? 51%? 30%? 70%? Whatever you say when you say we the people need to be final and be in charge, and we need to run the government, keep in mind that's going to trample on a lot of people's fundamental responsibilities. And keep in mind also the majorities almost always are wrong. Almost always. Not always. But in most cases, majorities are wrong. That's why God does not ordain government by a principle of majority rule, whether it be the majority of the people in a vote, as the French say, a referendum, or a majority of a 12-man jury, or a majority of a legislature. Majorities are not God's way of government. And if you get caught up in that, and if a country practices that, it will hurt them badly. You say, well, then what is proper government? Well, just stay with us and we'll just keep talking. And I think it probably will begin to ooze through more and more as we look at the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God. Well, are the people themselves to determine whether any law is contrary to our Constitution? Answer: no. No. Ooh, we got that one right. But certain persons whom they have appointed. Now, here he's wrong. Here he's wrong. Who determines whether a law is contrary to the Constitution? Well, no, I shouldn't say he's wrong. He says the Supreme Court of the United States determine it. Well, do they? Well, of course they do. But is that final? No, that's not final for anybody. That's not final for anybody. That's final for the judicial branch of government, yes. But not anybody else. And the judicial branch of government and the lawyers and the judges beneath the Supreme Court of the United States in that hierarchy, all the state judges, the Supreme Court judges of the states, the appellate judges of the federal courts are bound by an unwritten law, my friends, an unwritten law to follow that upper court. What do I mean when I say it's unwritten? I mean to say there's no law that says anybody, no place in our Constitution does it say everybody has to do what the Supreme Court of the United States says, and there's no place in our common law tradition where that was ever practiced that way. Why? Well, that's government by a single will. If that's the court of last resort and we all have to do what they say, that means the president has to do what they say. Well, if the president has to do what the Supreme Court says, why do we elect a president? That's silly. That's because it's not true. The president does not have to do what the Supreme Court of the United States says, and neither does the legislative branch of government, the United States Congress. I'm glad that Stansbury wrote this. I'm going to disagree with him at some points, but it is the duty of the Supreme Court of the United States to make that decision. But it's also your duty. It's the president's duty. It's every congressman, every senator's duty, every state legislator's duty, every governor's duty, every member of the militia's duty, the people, to make that decision in individual instances. And then decide how he's going to obey it or disobey it and why. And better know for sure. This is serious business, friends. The most important thing in the whole world among men that God has given us is what? The expression of his will, called his law. We also call it his word. The words of God are the expressions of his mind. That communicates his will. That's the will of the sovereign, his law. There's nothing more important in all of our lives than the word, the will, the law. Jesus Christ, the Bible calls the living what? Law. Jesus Christ suffered, bled, and was murdered, gave himself up for it. Why? To vindicate what? The will of the sovereign, the law of God. And to justify us who had broken that law. Oh boy, this is important. The law is the most important subject to any person, any member of Adam's race. And to study it and to know it, to not add to it, to guard, safeguard it from addition or subtraction is the greatest and the highest calling any of us can ever have. And we all have it. It's a responsibility, a duty that arises from what? Law, God's will. His word. Miss Francine, would you play us another song? And we come to the next question. Stansbury, he's thinking like me. Well, then how do you know which laws to obey and which not to obey? And this is the question number 36. This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com. www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.